Her 80th birthday, my mom should have been surrounded by love. The kind of night where laughter is louder than the music, and you can smell cake frosting before you even walk into the room. But instead, one sentence from my uncle stopped the whole room cold. "You're useless now." You could have heard a pin drop. The silver forks froze halfway to people's mouths. The candles on the cake flickered like they were afraid to breathe. And before I could even think, my legs were already moving toward the microphone. My name is Sarah. I'm 45 years old, and I live in Minnesota. My mom, Helen, turned 80 this winter. She's the kind of woman who never asked for help, even when she was drowning. When my father died in a car accident, she was only 37. She had 3 little kids and no savings. Most people would have collapsed. She went to work instead. 3 jobs, 7 days a week, no vacations, no safety net. Growing up, I watched her shovel snow at 5 in the morning with her hands wrapped in plastic bags because her gloves had holes. I watched her skip dinner so we could have seconds. I remember her selling her wedding ring at a pawn shop so she could pay our school fees. She was our anchor, our fighter, our shelter. But time, it wears you down. 2 winters ago, Mom fell on the ice and broke her hip. She recovered, but she slowed down. She started using a walker. She couldn't drive anymore. Suddenly, she wasn't the strong figure everyone leaned on, and that changed the way some people in the family treated her. There were whispers about selling the house or moving her somewhere she can get care. And while I understood the practical side, I also saw the hurt in her eyes when people spoke as if she were no longer part of her own life. Tonight was supposed to be different. We rented a private room at a restaurant she loves. There were white tablecloths and old jazz playing softly from the speakers. The walls were lined with framed black and white photos of the city in the 1950s. Family filled every chair. Kids ran under the tables, their laughter mixing with the clink of glasses. A slideshow of her life played on the wall. Pictures of her holding us as babies, standing in the snow with a shovel, wearing her church choir dress. One by one, relatives took turns at the microphone. They shared memories of growing up with Mom, of her kindness, of the pies she used to bake every Sunday. I watched her smile and laugh, her cheeks pink with happiness. Then it was my uncle's turn. Rick. He stepped up with that half smile he's famous for, the kind that never reaches his eyes. He leaned toward the mic and said, "Well, Helen, you've had a good run. Now you're just here for the cake." I saw Mom's smile vanish. I saw her hands tremble as she lowered them into her lap. It was meant as a joke, but it wasn't funny. It was a knife wrapped in a laugh. And the worst part? No one said a word. We spend our whole lives honoring birthdays, but what's the point if we stop honoring the person? That thought kept pounding in my head. And I knew I couldn't sit there and let her think this was okay. The moment the words left his mouth, the air in the room shifted. The music seemed to fade, the clinking of glasses stopped, and the slideshow of Mom's life kept playing in the background. A smiling, younger Helen holding me as a baby. But it felt almost cruel against what had just been said. We were at this cozy, old-style restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the lights are soft and warm, and the waiters know your name. It was supposed to be a celebration, not an ambush. The smell of roast beef and warm bread filled the air, but nobody was thinking about food anymore. Mom's hands were folded in her lap, her shoulders slightly hunched. She forced a small smile, the polite kind you give when you're pretending not to be hurt. Rick held the mic like he'd just told the world's funniest joke, chuckling at his own words. He added, 80 years, Helen. You've had a good run. Now all that's left is to enjoy the cake before you take that big nap someday." I could feel the ripple of discomfort move around the table. My cousin looked down at his plate. My aunt fiddled with her wine glass. A couple of younger family members stifled awkward laughs, maybe thinking this was just some dark humor. But I knew better. Rick's words weren't an accident. They carried years of resentment and a twisted sense of superiority. This wasn't the first time Rick had made digs at my mother. He'd been on her for months about selling her house. "It's too big for you, Helen. You can't keep up. You should move into assisted living. Let's be practical," he'd say. But practical, in Rick's language, meant do something that benefits me. I knew he was hoping to get his hands on the house, either to sell it or rent it to one of his kids. Mom had told him no, more than once. And Rick didn't take rejection well. Tonight, he saw his chance to humiliate her in front of everyone. The room was full. More than 30 people. Friends, extended family, even a couple of Mom's neighbors who had known her for decades. Many of them had been recipients of her generosity over the years. She'd babysat their kids, brought soup when they were sick, even covered utility bills in hard winters. And now, here they were, watching her be torn down without a word of defense. I felt my jaw tighten. I looked at Mom, and I swear I could see her retreat inward, like she was trying to make herself smaller so the moment would pass faster. The veins on her hands stood out as she gripped her napkin. In that instant, my pulse quickened, and I scanned the room for someone, anyone, to speak up. But there was only silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I knew then that if I didn't step in, no one would. I didn't just see my mother sitting there. I saw the woman who had carried 3 kids through snowstorms, who had stayed awake nights worrying about bills, who had given every ounce of herself so we could stand on our own feet. And now, someone was trying to strip away the dignity she'd earned. I glanced at the microphone in Rick's hand. My heart pounded so hard, I could feel it in my fingertips. I thought, if I don't take it now, she'll remember this humiliation for the rest of her life. The silence after Rick's words was heavier than any noise could have been. It wrapped around the room, thick and unyielding, pressing on everyone's chest. You could almost hear people's thoughts. Should I say something? Should I laugh? Should I look away? Mom's head was bowed now, her chin almost touching her chest. The silver strands of her hair caught the warm light from the chandelier, and her thin shoulders seemed to fold inward, like she was trying to disappear. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was shrinking, as if every year of her life had just been turned into a punchline. Her hands, once steady and strong from years of working 3 jobs, trembled slightly in her lap. She kept her eyes fixed on the white linen tablecloth, and I could see her trying to keep her breathing even, trying to will the heat in her cheeks to fade. I looked around the room. 30 faces. Not one willing to step forward. My sister sipped her wine without meeting my eyes. My cousin fiddled with his phone like something urgent had just come up. The family friend sitting nearest to Mom reached for the bread basket instead of her hand. It was as if everyone had silently agreed. If we ignore this, maybe it will go away. But I knew better. Words don't just vanish. They cling. They echo. They leave marks that can't be seen but can be felt every time the memory resurfaces. And this would be one of those moments for Mom. A humiliation that would live with her. That's when I noticed her eyes. She lifted them for just a second, and I caught it. That faint shimmer of moisture, the way she blinked too quickly. There was no anger in her look, no demand for justice. Instead, it was almost as if she was telling me, "Please, don't make this worse. Just let it go." But I couldn't. because I knew that if I stayed silent, I would be doing exactly what everyone else was doing, allowing her dignity to be chipped away while she sat there alone in it. And I also knew this wasn't about just one cruel comment. It was about years of quiet sacrifices that no one in this room seemed to remember when it mattered most. I felt my chair scrape the hardwood floor as I stood up. The sound was loud enough to draw eyes, but I didn't care. My legs were moving before my mind caught up. My focus locked on the microphone in Rick's hand. My pulse thudded in my ears, and I felt the heat rising in my face. Rick glanced at me with that smirk still sitting lazy on his lips, like he was daring me to say something. And I thought, you have no idea what's about to happen. I reached Rick before I had a plan for what I was going to say. All I knew was that I couldn't sit back and watch my mother's lifetime of sacrifices be reduced to a cheap laugh. I held out my hand. "Let me see that," I said, my voice steady, but louder than I expected. Rick raised an eyebrow, like he was humoring a child, but he handed me the mic. Maybe he thought I'd smooth things over for him? He was wrong. I turned to face the room first. 30 pairs of eyes followed me, some curious, some worried, a few looking like they wanted to be anywhere else. Then I turned back to Rick. "Funny," I said. "I don't remember you being there when she worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, or when she sold her wedding ring so we could finish school." A murmur rippled through the tables. Some heads dropped instantly, as if the air above their plates had suddenly become fascinating. My cousin wouldn't look at me. My sister stared at her napkin. I took a breath, feeling my heartbeat slow just enough for my words to land. "And I don't remember you being there when she shoveled snow at 5 in the morning with plastic bags over her hands because her gloves had holes, or when she skipped dinner so we could have enough." I let the silence sit for a moment, making sure it pressed on them the way it had pressed on her. Rick's smirk had faded. His hands were in his pockets now, his shoulders tense. The room felt warmer. But not from the lights. It was the heat of discomfort, of truths people didn't want to hear. I wasn't doing this to embarrass him. I was doing it so my mother would know that at least one person in this room remembered what she'd done for us, and was willing to say it out loud. In the corner of my eye, I saw the restaurant manager lower the background music completely, leaving my voice the only sound in the room. One of the youngest cousins, maybe 9 years old, slipped from her chair and went to stand beside Mom, holding her hand. That small gesture almost broke me. I turned back to the room. If someone disrespected the person who raised you, would you sit quietly? Or would you remind them who they're talking to? The question hung there, unanswered, but heavy enough that no one could escape it. I wasn't going to let the moment slip away. Not after everything Mom had done for us. Not after all the years of watching her carry burdens so heavy they would have crushed most people. I held the microphone and let the weight of the silence settle before I spoke. "You know what I remember?" I began, scanning the faces in front of me. Some eyes met mine, others darted away, suddenly fascinated by their silverware. I remember Mom walking me to the bus stop in a snowstorm, her coat half-zipped because she gave me her scarf. The wind was biting, but she kept her hand on my shoulder, shielding me from the gusts, like she could hold the whole sky back if she needed to. I paused, letting the image sink in. I remember her hands, red and cracked from shoveling snow before sunrise so we wouldn't slip on the steps. I remember her standing in our tiny kitchen at midnight, humming under her breath while she packed our lunches, skipping her own dinner so we could have seconds. And I remember never realizing, as a child, that she was hungry too. A cough came from somewhere near the back. Someone shifted in their chair, but I didn't stop. She worked nights cleaning offices downtown, mornings at the diner, afternoons watching other people's kids, and still, she showed up for us. She went to every parent-teacher meeting, every school play. She sat through football games in freezing rain just to clap for us when we ran onto the field, even if we only played for 30 seconds. I took a breath and let my gaze find hers. Mom was looking at me now, really looking. The tears were still in her eyes, but the way she sat had changed. Her shoulders weren't curled inward anymore. Her chin was higher. There was pride in her expression, the kind of pride that comes from being seen after years of being invisible. "That's the woman you just called useless," I said, turning my gaze back to Rick. "That's the woman who built this family from nothing, who took the worst day of her life, the day my father died, and still got up the next morning to keep us going. If you can't see that, maybe you've been blind for 80 years. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Rick's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I could have stopped there, but I didn't. I wanted everyone in that room to remember what she had given, not just to her kids, but to many of the people sitting at those tables. "Do you remember the winter of '94? I asked, looking toward my cousin near the dessert table. "You were 10. Your heat got shut off because your dad lost his job. You know who paid that bill? She did, and she never told you because she didn't want you to feel ashamed." I turned toward the far table. "Mrs. Thompson, you remember when she came to your door in the middle of a blizzard with groceries? She didn't even have enough for us that week, but she made sure you had food." One by one, eyes began to lift. People shifted forward in their seats, drawn in not by me, but by the truth of the stories. "This isn't about embarrassing anyone," I said, my voice steady but firm. "It's about making sure we remember who we're talking to before we let our words strip someone's dignity away. She earned her place here 100 times over, and no one, not even family, gets to take that away from her." For a moment, no one moved. Then my sister started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. The sound grew, not into wild applause, but into a steady, heartfelt rhythm. It was the kind of clapping that carried weight, the kind that meant, "We hear you. We agree." We should have said it ourselves. Mom's lips curved into a smile, not the polite one she'd worn earlier, but a smile that reached her eyes. Her gaze stayed locked on mine, and I knew that whatever hurt she'd felt minutes ago had been pushed back by something stronger. I let my eyes sweep the room one last time. "If someone gave their whole life to you," I asked, "do you think they deserve your silence when they're disrespected? Or your voice when they need it most?" The question didn't need an answer. The quiet that followed was enough. I hoped they'd carry it with them long after the cake was gone and the candles were cold. The applause faded into a softer hum of conversation. But the atmosphere was different now. The tension that had hung like a heavy curtain was lifting. It wasn't gone completely. Some people still avoided my eyes. But there was a current of something new in the room. Respect. Maybe even a little shame. Aunt Linda stood first. She was in her 70s now, her hair silver like Mom's, but her voice was clear and strong. She walked to our table and placed her hand over Mom's. "Helen," she said, "I should have spoken up before Sarah had to. I'm sorry." She looked around the room as if daring anyone to contradict her. We all should be. One by one, people began to move. Mom's old neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, came forward, telling the story of how Mom had shown up at her door with groceries during a winter when she and her husband couldn't afford food. "You didn't have enough for yourself," Mrs. Thompson said, tears in her eyes. "But you gave to us anyway." Another cousin spoke up. recalling how Mom had watched his kids for free for months so he could work double shifts to pay off debt. Someone else remembered her paying for gas when they were stranded after a snowstorm. The stories kept coming, each one pulling another thread in the fabric of her life, a fabric woven from sacrifices most people never saw. I glanced over at Rick. His smirk was gone. His face was red, his lips pressed tight. He was staring at his water glass like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. I knew he hated being called out, but I also knew he'd never admit it. Still, the power he'd tried to wield over the room was gone. Then Aunt Linda's voice cut through again, stronger this time. "Rick," she said, turning toward him, "you remember when you almost lost your house in 2009? The only reason you didn't was because Helen paid your back taxes. I have the email from the bank to prove it." She turned back to the room. She never told anyone because that's who she is. She helps and doesn't ask for credit. A ripple went through the crowd. Heads turned toward Rick, waiting for him to respond. He didn't. His ears burned red, and he kept his gaze locked on the tablecloth. Mom sat a little taller. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The dignity that had been chipped at earlier in the night had been restored, piece by piece, with every story told. I could see it in the way she held herself now. Her spine straighter, her chin higher, her hands resting calmly on the table instead of twisting the napkin in her lap. She wasn't just surviving the night anymore. She was owning it. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each person who had stayed silent before. Some looked away. Others gave small nods. "When someone has given so much to you," I said quietly, "silence can be as cruel as the insult itself. Which one will you choose next time?" The words didn't hang like a challenge. They settled like a truth that no one could deny. And for the first time all evening, I felt the weight lift from my own chest. The party didn't end all at once. It wound down slowly, the way a song fades instead of stopping. People lingered at the dessert table, slicing extra pieces of cake they didn't need, hugging Mom longer than usual. Some of them had tears in their eyes, and for once, they didn't try to hide them. The room felt warmer, softer, as if the walls themselves had relaxed. But I kept watching Mom. She was different now. Her posture was straight, her eyes alert. When someone came up to her, she didn't look down or wave them off. She held their gaze, listened, and smiled. She was present, and I realized that this night, which had begun as an attempt to humiliate her, was ending with her being celebrated in a way she hadn't been in years. Still, I noticed the subtle signs of her exhaustion. The way she shifted her weight on the chair, how she held her arm close to her side to ease the ache from her old injury. When the last few guests began to leave, I stepped in beside her. "Ready to go home?" I asked. She nodded, and I helped her into her coat. The fabric felt heavier than I remembered, maybe because she seemed smaller inside it now. Her hands were warm in mine, not from the temperature in the room, but from something deeper, a heat that came from being seen and valued. We made our way toward the exit, but halfway to the door, she stopped. We were near the cloakroom, tucked away from the main dining area. The soft hum of conversation was behind us now. And for the first time all night, it was just us. She turned to me, her eyes glistening, and without a word, she wrapped her arms around me. I felt her hold, strong, almost fierce, and it took me back to when I was a little girl and she'd hug me like that after I'd fallen off my bike or had a bad day at school. It wasn't just affection, it was protection, reassurance, a silent, "I've got you." You gave me my dignity back tonight, she whispered into my ear. Her voice was steady, but there was a weight in it that told me just how much she meant it. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight, and the words I wanted to say came out halting. I should have done it sooner. All those other times I stayed quiet. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was just letting people treat you like you didn't matter. She pulled back enough to look at me, shaking her head. No, you did what mattered when it mattered most. That's what I'll remember. Then she reached into her bag. It was a small, well-worn purse I'd seen her carry for years. She dug inside and pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that holds jewelry you expect to see only once in a lifetime. What's this? I asked, confused. She opened it slowly, almost ceremonially. Inside was a gold ring. The diamond was modest, the band thin from years of wear, but the moment I saw it, I knew exactly what it was. Her wedding ring. I froze. Mom, you sold this. I did, she said softly. To pay for your school fees. And I never regretted it. But I also told myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd buy it back. On my own terms. She went on to explain how she'd been saving for years, a little at a time. Babysitting at the church, knitting scarves and mittens for the winter market, tucking away any extra dollars she could spare. I wanted to wear it again, she said, but not as a reminder of what I lost. I wanted it to be a reminder of what I've built. Tonight felt like the right night. I took the box from her hands and closed it gently, placing it back in her palms. You've built more than a family, Mom. You've built the kind of legacy people tell stories about. My voice cracked on the last words, and I had to look away for a second to keep from breaking completely. She smiled, and it was the same smile I'd seen in the photos on the slideshow earlier, the one from her younger years, full of quiet confidence. She slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in decades, it was back where it belonged. We stood there for a moment, not speaking, just holding on to each other in that little corner of the restaurant, while the world outside went on as usual. The clink of dishes in the kitchen, the muffled chatter from the few remaining guests, it all faded into the background. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the moments we choose to speak up become the stories our loved ones remember most. And sometimes, they become the stories we carry too. The ones that shape how we see ourselves when no one else is watching. I knew I'd remember tonight for the rest of my life, not because of what Rick said, but because of what happened after. Because in one evening, I saw my mother reclaim the part of herself no one should have tried to take in the first place. And I realized something else. Maybe the greatest gift you can give someone isn't protection from pain, but proof that they're worth defending when it counts. We stepped outside into the cool night air, the kind that wakes you up and clears your head. Snow crunched under our feet as we made our way to the car. The streets were quiet, lined with glowing street lamps that cast soft halos onto the fresh dusting of white. Mom's breath formed little clouds in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I noticed how peaceful she looked. The drive home was mostly silent, not the awkward kind of silence, the comfortable kind, where words aren't needed because everything important has already been said. Every now and then, I'd glance over at her, the ring catching the dashboard light as she rested her hand on her lap. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't shrinking into the passenger seat. She looked whole. When we pulled into her driveway, I offered to walk her inside. She shook her head with a small smile. I can make it from here, she said, her voice carrying a hint of pride. But as I helped her out of the car, she leaned close and whispered, I'm glad you didn't stay quiet tonight. Inside her house, the familiar scent of lavender and old books wrapped around us. She set her purse down on the entry table and took off her coat, draping it neatly over the back of a chair. She moved slowly, but not like someone weighed down by the world, more like someone savoring each step. We sat in her living room, the soft glow from the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Family photos lined the mantel. Birthdays, graduations, summers at the lake. I realized each picture was proof of what she had built. Not just a family, but a legacy. She turned to me and said, "You know, people think respect is something you give someone when they've earned it. But they forget. It's also something you keep giving, even when the person can't fight for it themselves anymore." Her words landed with the kind of truth you can feel in your chest. I thought about how many birthdays we'd celebrated over the years, cakes, candles, cards. But tonight, I'd seen something more important than a celebration. I'd seen how fragile dignity can be, and how quickly it can be restored when someone steps up. We talked a little longer about nothing and everything, the neighbors, the weather, how she still hated that Rick put too much salt in the mashed potatoes. But beneath the light chatter, there was an unspoken understanding between us. Tonight had changed something. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. She hugged me again, softer this time, and said, "Thank you for reminding me I'm still me." Driving home, the street seemed even quieter than before. I replayed the night in my head, the silence after Rick's words, the faces around the table, the moment I decided not to sit still. And I realized that defending her had done something for me too. It reminded me who I was raised to be. Respect isn't a favor you give out when it's convenient. It's a debt you repay over and over, especially when the person you owe can't speak as loudly as they used to. So now I find myself wondering, and I hope anyone who hears this wonders too. When was the last time you defended someone you love? Did you speak loud enough for the whole room to hear? Or just loud enough for yourself? Because I can tell you this much. The loudest voice in the room that night wasn't Rick's. It was the one that finally stood up and said, "Enough." And sometimes that's all it takes to give someone back what never should have been taken in the first place.